In this session, we're going to take a look at some of the properties with the numbers 0 and 1. First of all, as a quick review, even though many people at the outset as they start learning math have sometimes a struggle understanding the concept of 0 because you really can't count 0. You don't have, it's not something that's readily visible that you can count. Uh, 0 nevertheless is still a number. And what I'm going to do is just take a quick look at our place value and to show you how we commonly use the number 0. Here's our number 207. If you remember, the first place to the far right of the number is called the ones or the units place. The next one's called the tens, and the next one to the left is called the hundreds. Well, if we take this number 207 and break it down, each digit in each place tells us how often or how many of that place value there is. So for a particular number, we're going to start at the far left. 2. Well, the 2 is in the hundreds place. So if we were to rewrite 207 by place, we could say 207 is the same thing as 2 times 100 because the 2 is in the hundreds place. Well, what do we have in the tens place? Well, we have a 0 there. That 0 is holding the place. So 0 times 10 is what that represents. And then our last place here, our units or our ones place, is filled in by a 7. So that would represent 7 times 1. So even though 0 is not something you can count, it can still hold a place in our place value, and it can still help us to effectively write numbers as well as determine answers to problems. So 0 is in fact a very useful number. Well, down here are some very basic characteristics or properties about the number 0. X plus 0 is always equal to x. What does that mean? Well, it means no matter what number you start with, and that's what the x represents, the variable. If you add 0 to that number, your answer is going to be the number that you started with. It's always going to be that way. 100 plus a 0 is 100. 1 plus 0 is 1. 10 plus 0 is 10. So no matter what number you start with, if you add 0 to it, you end up with the original number. The same is true with subtraction. X minus 0, no matter what number you start with, if you subtract 0 from it, you're left with that original number. X minus 0 will always equal x. Next is multiplication. Doesn't matter what the number is that you start with, if you're going to multiply that number by 0, your answer is always going to be 0. However, we run into a little bit of difficulty when we take a look at division by 0. And that's what we're going to take a look here at our next screen. X divided by 0 equals what? Well, just as a quick reminder, when we have a division problem written here as fractions, 10 divided by 2, well, we know that that equals 5. Well, in order for this to be accurate, we have to be able to take our quotient, our answer here, multiply it by our denominator of this fraction to get our numerator. Does 5 times 2 in fact equal 10? Yes, it does. Same over here. Does 4 times 4 equal 16? Yes, it does. Therefore, 16 divided by 4 does equal 4 because our answer multiplied by our denominator gives us our numerator. However, if we do that over here with our x divided by 0, we're going to run into a problem. So let me go ahead and get rid of this question mark here. And the question is, what number here times 0 will give us x? I'm just giving you a second to think about that. What number times 0 would equal x? Well, we don't really know what x is yet. But let's say x is a 1. Well, what number times 0 equals 1? Well, there isn't any. Because remember from our preceding screen, any number times 0 is always going to be 0. Well, let's say x is 100. Well, what number times 0 is 100? Well, there isn't any number because everything times 0 is always 0. So we can see that it's impossible to be able to divide any number by 0. What they say is x divided by 0 is undefined. It has no answer. It has no definition to it. So that's the exception that we ran into. x plus 0 always equals 0. X minus 0 always equals 0. Or excuse me, x plus 0 always equals x. X minus 0 always equals x. X times 0 always equals 0. But x divided by 0 is undefined. And once again, because there is no number times this denominator of 0 that'll give us this x. Well, let's take a look at one other example. This time we're going to have 0 in the numerator in the top of our fraction and 0 in the denominator of our fraction. Does this work? Well, yes and no. What number times 0 equals 0? Does 7 work? Well, sure. 7 times 0 is 0. Why? Because any number times 0 equals 0. Well, let's say instead of doing a 7, we go ahead and choose 213. Does 213 times 0 equal 0? Yes, it does. And what we can see is every single number that you can think of will work. Does 0.16 work as an answer? Yes, because 0.16 times 0 does equal 0, because any number times 0 equals 0. So up here we have x over 0 being undefined. And then what we have down here is 0 divided by 0 is undetermined. In other words, you can't determine the exact answers because there are an infinite number of answers. Any number over here will work as an answer. So we have a couple exceptions. X divided by 0 is undefined. 0 divided by 0 is undetermined. Well, before we move on any quicker, I do want to show you that if 0 is in the top, and we had a fraction that said 0/13, 0 divided by 13, does that work? Is there an answer to this question, to this problem? Well, the answer is yes. What number times 13 equals 0? Well, 0 times 13 equals 0. And it doesn't matter what this denominator is. We could have made it a 13, we could have made it a 600, we could have made it a 1. The answer is still going to be 0. 0 times whatever is over here is going to give us 0. So you can divide 0 by another number, but you can never take a number and divide it by 0. So those are the characteristics or properties of 0. Okay, the last thing that I want to do on this screen before we move on to our final review page is to take a look at the number 1. There's just a couple different properties about the number 1. The first one is it doesn't matter what number we start with. Once again, that's what that x, that variable represents. It represents an unknown number. It doesn't matter what that number is that we start with. If you multiply it by 1, your answer is always going to be the number that you started with. 100 times 1 is 100. 17 times 1 is 17. 0 times 1 is 0. The second characteristic, or the second property about 1, is that when you divide by 1, no matter what the number is you start with, x divided by 1 will always equal x. 100 divided by 1 is 100. 17 divided by 1 is 17. 0 divided by 1 is 0. So those are the two primary properties then about the number 1. Okay then, as a final reminder, you can never divide a number by 0. Dividing by 0 is undefined. Okay, that'll wrap up this session number 7 on 0 and 1.